Well, thank you very much for that kind introduction, and thank you very much, Auntie, for the welcome to country. So let me respond in the Ngunnawal language. Yangu galanyin nalawiri, dani Ngunnawal dara, wangara li jinyin, maran balan bagarabang. And you know, in this country of ours, this remarkable country of ours, which has been the home of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people for 60,000 years, when Europeans came to this country, when they invaded this country and settled in this country, there were 250 absolutely distinct Aboriginal languages, as different from each other, most of them, as Hungarian is from English or Spanish is from Chinese. This vast linguistic inheritance has been largely lost, and almost all of the speakers, of first language speakers of Aboriginal languages are now in the Northern Territory. But do you know Aboriginal people have sought to gather the fragments of their language with the love and determination of people gathering the remnants of a shipwreck along a beach, a piece here, a piece there, and bringing it back together. And in this city in Canberra, there is a remarkable institution which Lucy and I visited and have supported, AATSIS, which is an extraordinary institution that promotes and preserves and, but above all, promotes First Nations culture. And so those words I spoke to you a moment ago, remarkably, were the words I spoke in 2016 in the House of Representatives. It was the first time in our history that a Prime Minister had spoken in language, in a first Australian language, in our Parliament. That shows you how late we have been in recognising our Aboriginal history, the entirety of our history, our Australian history. We are the most remarkable country. We are as young as the baby in the arms of her migrant mother and as old as the 60,000 years of Aboriginal custodianship of this country. We are the most multicultural country in the world. Nearly 30% of all Australians were born outside of Australia, and more than half of us have a parent born outside of Australia. There is no developed country in the world that is comparable to that. So our multicultural nature, our nation, both ancient and new, as old as time and as new as that baby, is a remarkable achievement. And we do not define our nationhood by reference to race or to religion or to a particular culture. We define our nationhood by our democratic values. We are not a republic in terms of our constitution, but my friends, we have been a republic for many years because we have a nation, a system of government, a sense of national identity that enables every Australian, regardless of their background, of their race, of their age, where they came from or what they look like, to look in that mirror and say, I look like an Australian. We are a remarkable nation, and despite the fact that we are always prepared to run ourselves down, we should be so proud of what we've achieved, and we should always be prepared to stand up for our country and put our country first. And so our claim as Republicans is no more than saying that our head of state should do the same. We're standing here in the King's Hall of the old Parliament, and there is the King, George V, King Emperor, Rex Imperator. And you know, when that statue was erected, when this old Parliament was built, Australia was not remotely an independent nation, not at all. And it did not pretend to be. We were a subordinate part of the British Empire. Indeed, when this house was built, Britain did not have a High Commissioner or an ambassador in Canberra. It had no need to do so. The Governor-General was appointed by the British government to represent the British government and to be able to exercise the power that still remains in the Constitution, if you care to read it, which enables the Governor-General to refer a law passed by the Australian Parliament back to London to be approved by the Queen, which of course meant in those days the Imperial government, the British government in Whitehall. And indeed there remains a provision in the Constitution which enables the Queen to disallow an Australian law which has not only been passed by the House and the Senate and not only given royal assent by the Governor-General, to disallow that law within 12 months of its enactment. And why was that? Because the Imperial government wanted to make sure that if colonial governments, colonial parliaments ran off the rails and passed a law that offended imperial interests, and if their governor or Governor-General appointed by Whitehall for some reason or other lost his mind and agreed to it, they could nonetheless cancel it within 12 months. So don't ever believe that our Constitution was the birth certificate of a nation. Australia was not an independent nation in 1901. No way. And indeed, our independence, our national identity evolved. It was in 1948 when Menzies said the boundaries of Britain are not on the Kentish coast, but at Invercargill. And he was talking about New Zealand's Invercargill, not Scotland's, and Cape York. And in 1953, Menzies again, speaking just behind me here in the House of Representatives, speaking of the monarchy and the crown, said the crown is the symbol that wherever we are in the world, we are one people. One British people. Australia was a geographic description. It was a self-governing dominion of the British Empire. It was not an independent nation. But that is what we have become. And so this gentleman here, this imperial and royal gentleman here, George V, when he presided over this hall, he did so as the leader of an empire of which we were a dominion. But today, Australia is an independent nation and has been so on any view for many decades. And so the Republican cause is a jealous cause because we say we love this country so much. We love this country so much we demand that our head of state is one of us as well. What an absurdity. What an absurdity we face today with Section 44 of the Constitution, much of the jurisprudence of which I have, to some extent, initiated and on occasions mispredicted. Section 44 says you can't be a member of Parliament and have dual citizenship. You can only be a citizen of Australia. And I think, despite all the inconveniences and awkwardnesses I think the vast majority of Australians agree with that. I think those that say we should seek to change Section 44 are doing so with great optimism. But yet we have a head of state, the Queen, magnificent, noble, selfless woman that she is, a servant of her people and so many others. And yet she is not a citizen of Australia, and she is certainly, if she is a citizen of Australia, she is a citizen of every one of her dominions. And so how crazy is it that we say a member of parliament or a senator can only be a citizen of Australia because we want to have that undiluted singular allegiance to this country and this country alone, and yet our head of state's first allegiance and that of her family plainly is overwhelmingly to the land of their birth, the United Kingdom. And speaking of the United Kingdom, our Albo raised a very good point when he quoted Anthony Green talking about the potential breakup of the UK. The Constitution Act, which is an act of the British Parliament, says the provisions of this act referring to the Queen shall extend to Her Majesty's heirs and successors in the sovereignty of the United Kingdom. And there's no question that if, from a constitutional law point of view, if Britain were to become a republic, the President of the Republic would be our head of state. There is no question about that. But equally, and of course the drafters of that constitution would have said, well, it's really none of your business, you're just a dominion. But you know, what happens if the United Kingdom ceases to exist? What happens if Scotland decides to secede and there is no longer a United Kingdom? You can see the absurdity, the indignity of having our constitution dependent on decisions and events over which we have no control at the other end of the world. Now, it's 20 years since the referendum. We fought hard, but we lost. It was a very sad night, as so many of us remember. And I want to thank all of the great, hard-working Republicans here, my wife Lucy, who was the great support for me in our campaign, my dear old friend, and I'll burst into tears if I talk about him too much, Neville Wran. What a great hero he was. And look, so many others, so many of them have all used to say to me, I just want us to be a republic in my lifetime. And I have to say to all of them, I'm sorry we couldn't achieve that. But we will get there. I want to acknowledge Susan Ryan. You know, Susan and I were on the Constitutional Advisory Committee, the Republic Advisory Committee, that Paul Keating set up in 1993. It was a very good committee. I thought we wrote a very good report on how to be on all the different ways we could be a republic. It's a great reference work, and we had a lot of fun travelling around the country. Susan and I were reflecting on some incidents that aren't fit for sharing in this large audience. But, you know, and George Winterton, who also is no longer with us, a great constitutional lawyer, George and I drafted the draft amendments for the Constitution, which I think have stood the test of time and will be of great use in the future. But, you know, Susan made a very good point. She made one of the best suggestions in the whole exercise, and she said, why do we need a head of state at all? And it was a very good one, and I think perhaps that might be something that will be revisited in the future. Now, I want to talk about the question of how we become a republic going from here, because there's no point. And, you know, Peter's made this point and he's doing a fantastic job as chair of the ARM, and I want to thank you, Peter, for your chairmanship. And I want to thank all the politicians who've been brave enough to come down here and associate with me. That's very game of you, particularly Jason Falinski. There's courage. But I just want to say the reality is that, you know, I just riff off what Richard Di Natale said. You know, if anyone wondered whether Richard Di Natale was a transformational leader of the Greens, then you only have to reflect that he said tonight, we can't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. Now, the fact is that that's precisely what happened in 1999. That's precisely what happened in 1999. It happened not so long ago with an emissions trading scheme, I recall too. But nonetheless, what happened in 1999 was that people who wanted to directly elect the president campaigned against the model that was proposed, and many of them said, or were consoled themselves by saying, don't worry, we'll have another vote in a couple of years' time. And there's nothing I've ever said in public life truer than when I said in that campaign, if we vote no, it means no for a very long time. And that was the reality. Now, how do we get to yes from here? I'll give you my view. It's for what it's worth. Clearly, you've got to find the right. We've got to have the right timing. My view from '99 has been, and it has been for 20 years, that the next time this issue will be at a point where you could confidently predict people will say, yes, this is an issue of the day, yes, this is a time to vote for that change, will be at the end of the Queen's reign. Now, there are plenty of other people wiser than me politically, including Bob Hawke, who've had that view. Others differ. But let me that's my opinion, and I'll put that to one side. Let me talk now about process, because process matters. To change the Australian Constitution, you need to propose a specific set of amendments. You can't do what David Cameron did, so tragically, and just say to people, do you want to be a republic, or do you want to leave the European Union? You've actually got to say, do you want to amend the Constitution with these specific words? So you have to have a specific model agreed on. Now, what happened in '99 was we had two debates going on at the same time. We had the Land of Hope and Glory Brigade saying, you know, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. We've got to defend the monarchy. And then we had the direct electionists saying, it's just a politician's republic. You know, you don't want to have the president elected by Parliament. The people should vote for it. So what we need to do is thrash that issue out first. Now, in the '93 Republic Advisory Committee report, which I referred to earlier, we actually presented a set of amendments that would deal with the type of Republican proposal we proposed, where the President had the same powers as the Governor-General and was chosen by a bipartisan majority of Parliament. And that was fairly straightforward, so we had that one. But George and I also drafted much more elaborate provisions to deal with a directly elected president, on the basis that the president would not be, like the American president, the head of government as well as the head of state. I don't think there's a lot of support in Australia to have a president that is an analogy of the US president. I might be wrong. I'm often been accused of being out of touch with public opinion, but I think I'm on the money there. Obviously, if you look at the Australian Constitution as it's written at the moment, you would think the Governor-General ran the country. In fact, the Prime Minister and the Cabinet are not even mentioned. So the constraints on the Governor-General are all contained in these unwritten constitutional conventions and so forth. So if you had a directly elected president, you'd clearly have to spell all that out. So that means much more amendments. Okay. What we need to have is a plebiscite, a public vote, which sets out a direct election model and a parliamentary appointment model. And we need to thrash that out for months and let people go uphill and down dale about it, have a good old Barney, and come to a decision. And once that decision has been taken, then that is the model, whether it's direct election or parliamentary appointment, that gets put into the amendments that go in the referendum. That is I've had 20 years to think about it. That, I can tell you, is my considered opinion as to how we can best deal with this. We cannot afford to have another referendum where we are fighting on two fronts. Now, I'll deal with one other issue about a plebiscite. Paul Keating proposed back in the 90s that we should just have a plebiscite as to whether we should be a republic or not. But Paul had and you can, as I describe this, you'll recognise how long ago this was. Paul believed that if Australians said, yes, we want to be a republic, they would trust the Parliament to choose the model. He's an idealist. I honestly think a plebiscite that just said, do you want to be a republic or not, would get trashed. Because people would say, you're asking for a blank cheque, what sort of republic? So I would sincerely counsel any future Prime Minister not to undertake that route. I think we've got to deal with direct election versus parliamentary appointment first. Now, I'll just address the issue of the merits of direct election versus parliamentary appointment. The argument against direct election that the ARM accepted and that many other people did was that if you want to have a role, a public role, a constitutional role that is in effect an apolitical constitutional umpire, a non-political person, then having them chosen in what would inevitably be a very contested national vote is hardly the right way to go about it. I remember Neville Rand saying to me during the Constitutional Convention, which was held just here in the old House of Representatives chamber, he said, if the candidate wasn't a politician at the time they nominated, they'd certainly be a politician if they won. And so that's the argument against it. Now, interestingly, whenever the matter was put before a group of people, whether it was a formal focus group or whether it was a public meeting, the support for direct election fell like a stone once people reflected on that reality. And again, this was a point that Keating always used to make, that the support for direct election was, a mile wide but an inch deep. Because once people recognised that you would get a political person in what should be a non-political role, their views would change. And there was a huge sort of forum, focus group, I suppose, with hundreds of people in this room here, actually, during the public referendum debate and campaign, which bore that out. So I think that just goes back to the point I'm making, that I think we've got to thrash this direct election versus parliamentary appointment out first. And then if we do that, everyone will live by the outcome, I've got no doubt about that, and then the relevant amendments go into the proposal. So that's the way forward. There is clearly a way forward. Timing is going to be critically important. I've never I've never enjoyed or favoured glorious defeats. I like to win. I would rather have an inglorious, grasping, scratching win than a glorious defeat. And we've had one glorious defeat as Republicans, so we've got to make sure the next one is one we win. And my friends, we will. Because this country is so remarkable. It is so great. It is so Australian that we must demand our head of state, the person at the top of our Constitution, is one of us, an Australian. The Republic will win it, and I want to thank you for your support in years past and look forward to more support in the years to come. Thank you.